Breathe deep. Imagine your legs more limber in Duluth Trading Double Flex Denim. Envision euphorically squatting for that can of suds, bending for your toolbox in a state of bliss, lunging for your laser level on a whole new level. Relax and allow the flex to fill you with ability. Find your inner flex in Double Flex Denim only at Duluth Trading.
They say to only bring what you can carry. So with the all-new 2025 Ford Expedition Tremor, bring a lot. Like 3 dirt bikes, a few tents, an entire crew ready to make memories. A panoramic 24-inch display, and the confidence to push your limits. The all-new 2025 Ford Expedition Tremor.
Always consult the owner's manual before off-road driving. Know your terrain and trail difficulty and use appropriate safety gear. Max payload varies based on accessories and vehicle configuration. See label on door jamb for carrying capacity of a specific vehicle. Always properly secure cargo.
Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Northern Kentucky University political scientist Michael Baranowski. I'm joined today by my counterpart on the left, Professor of Law at Chase Law School, Ken Kacken.
Hey, it's great to be back, Michael.
Yes, it is. And, I thought we would start on a real, not a, because I thought we would start on the upbeat story of starvation. But unfortunately, it's a thing. And, it's been a long time since things were good in Gaza. But of late, they're, I would say, squarely in, I'd call it catastrophic territory. I mean, starvation is a widespread problem there. According to the UN's World Food Program, almost a third of the 2.1 million people in Gaza don't eat for multiple days in a row. And part of this is because Israel has imposed really tough controls on food distribution. Their view is that this is necessary to prevent Hamas from stealing food aid. And even when food is able to enter the country, getting it to people can be challenging because of various travel restrictions and military activities. And President Trump actually recently broke with, at least a little bit, with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, because Netanyahu said there is no starvation in Gaza. And Trump said, well, and looking at the images on TV, those children look very hungry, and that's real starvation stuff. I see it, and you can't fake that. We have to get the kids fed. Now, Trump followed this by announcing a plan and criticizing current Gaza food aid distribution. He told reporters, we're going to set up food centers where people can walk in and no boundaries. We're not going to have fences. They see the food, it's all there, but nobody's at it, meaning at present, because they have fences set up there that no one can even get at it. It's crazy what's going on over there. Trump also called on other countries to help out, saying this isn't a U.S. problem, it's an international problem. And then he followed that pretty, I would say, good stuff up by saying, nobody said, gee, thank you very much. And it would be nice to have at least a thank you. Underappreciated Donald Trump. Anyway, Ken, what's your take on the food situation in Gaza, President Trump's response, and, what you think we should be doing in this situation?
Well, it seems true that there's a famine in Gaza right now. It does seem like it needs to be addressed. I think at least part of it is Trump's fault, because earlier on in the crisis, he was basically encouraging the idea that all the Palestinians should have to leave Gaza. Remember, he talked about he was going to get them all out of there and make it a beach resort for other people to come to, and that kind of rhetoric, I think, was something that appealed to Netanyahu's very worst instincts, and that it made Netanyahu feel like he could make the conditions in Gaza, as intolerable as he wanted to try to, get people to leave. And I think that did play a big role in this, whereas if you had a more normal American administration that would not have encouraged the idea that you could just somehow force all the Palestinians to leave Gaza, it might never have come to this. And so I think the U.S. bears a lot of responsibility. But there also are, as you said, some serious issues around, how do you distribute food aid in Gaza? Because, for better or worse, the only government Gaza has right now is Hamas. And Hamas, would be, in a position to control most kinds of food distribution if food was just handed off to the authorities there. And that might not help the famine problem very much at all, except for the Hamas fighters who are hungry. They might get all the food. So I think there's some sort of formal practical problems that need to be solved, but definitely food needs to come in. The international community needs to play a role in bringing it in. I guess Steve Witkoff is there now, or at least on what was Friday in Gaza. I guess it might not be Friday in Gaza anymore. It's Friday here as we're recording. Hamas has kind of denounced that as a propaganda show. It's hard for me to know what it really means, but something's got to be done to ameliorate the famine quickly.
Yeah. It seemed to me that in an earlier era, at least, at least some of us would be looking to the UN to come in with some kind of a peacekeeping humanitarian mission, but I don't really see that necessarily being a viable option here.
No, I mean, there's been a lot of bad blood between the UN Human Rights Agency and the Netanyahu government in Israel. And I think given the exigency of the crisis and, how quickly it needs to be addressed, I think it would be an obstacle to that to try to bring in an agency like the UNHRA that Netanyahu is basically very suspicious of and considers to be supporters of Hamas. And, it would probably be better. I mean, kind of paradoxically, I think Netanyahu actually has more trust in some of the governments of some of the other Arab countries than he has in the UNHRA, but really maybe the US, should be playing that role. But I'm not really sure what role the U.S. is actually going to play, despite Witkoff's visit there today.
Because it certainly seemed that President Trump wants to do something about that. And I guess the question is this just sort of a rhetorical commitment, or is he willing to, commit a certain amount of resources, a real amount of resources to this? And even if he is willing to do that, is that something that Prime Minister Netanyahu would go along with?
Yeah, I think he has basically said it's just going to be rhetorical, and that's not going to be real, because he has said, and Witkoff has also said, that the food aid to Israel is going to be delivered by this organization called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. So that would not be by U.S. peacekeeping troops. That would be by a very Netanyahu-aligned, nonprofit that is largely backed by, extremely Zionist American evangelicals, and that's been accused a lot of actually shooting Palestinians who came to get the food. So that's not that. I think the idea that that's how we're going to channel our aid is through the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is basically a declaration that we're not serious.
I guess that's a problem in this situation, is that essentially, if you want the aid to be delivered, you have to give it to one of the two combatants in this, and that's not necessarily. And both sides potentially want to use that for their own purposes, and not necessarily to feed the large number of starving people.
Yeah, but it could be done by U.S. peacekeeping troops, but I just think that's way off the table. But, I think as a practical matter, because Trump is not willing to commit U.S. peacekeeping troops, it's got to be one or the other combatant. And I do think, the way you characterized it, I didn't find the words as well as you did, but the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, I think, could be accurately characterized as a Israeli combatant group. And then, the alternative would be to give it to Hamas. So, there's problems either way there. And I think if Trump isn't going to break that logjam, that's just another way of saying he's not serious.
Running a business comes with a lot of what ifs. But luckily, there's a simple answer to them. Shopify. It's the commerce platform behind millions of businesses, including Thrive Cosmetics and Momofuku. And it'll help you with everything you need. From website design and marketing to boosting sales and expanding operations, Shopify can get the job done and make your dream a reality. Turn those what ifs into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
You're tuned into Auto Intelligence, live from Auto Trader, where data, tools, and your preferences sync to make your car shopping smooth.
They're searching inventory.
Oh, yeah.
They find what you need.
They're gonna find it.
You can make a budget for your wallet to help you succeed. Pricing's precise and true.
So true.
It's smarter car shopping.
Ooh.
Just for you.
Oh, it's just for you.
Ooh.
Find your next ride at autotrader.com. Powered by Auto Intelligence.
I guess more broadly thinking about this, I'm trying to understand Netanyahu's endgame here, because he obviously wants to destroy Hamas. But this fall, I mean, in a couple of months, right? It's August now. Yeah, in a couple of months, it'll be 2 years since those horrendous October 7th Hamas attacks. And as far as I can tell, there's number one, no clear path to victory, and number two, no plan for how a post-Hamas Gaza would even function. And so I guess is there more to this than just Netanyahu wanting to have Israelis rally around the flag as long as possible so he can stay in power and not actually be called to account for his alleged crimes? I'm pretty sure that's part of it, but I really hope it's not all of it. I don't know. You've been following this more closely than I have. I mean, you and Trey are usually our Middle East correspondents, if you will. So what do you think?
Yeah, well, I think what you said is the major part of it, but maybe not the only part of it, because I do think there's a certain strain of Zionism, and always has been since 1947. And it hasn't been the majority Zionist view, but there's a certain strain of Zionism that really, is in favor of continued territorial conquest in the area, right? So that, the idea of famine, could be linked to the idea of making it so intolerable that the people who live in Gaza will leave. And the more of them who leave, the more of an opportunity there could be for greater Israel to expand its territorial footprint. And I think that Netanyahu, is himself a little bit more of a pragmatist and thinks that that's a long shot and not something likely. But I think he's got people in his coalition who actually are working directly for that goal, because his coalition consists of parties that are further to the right than his own party. And I think he is kind of, thinking that even though it's not likely to happen, it's a goal that he would like to see happen. And so, he's kind of, working for it, somewhat. So I do think his primary motivations relate to his own, current political survival in Israel, and even just staying out of prison. But I think his kind of secondary goals relate to the idea that, it's not just about, replacing Hamas with a different Palestinian government. It's about, getting the Palestinians out of there. And so I think that's part of what he's doing.
Yeah, you could argue that at least in this instance, there might be some tension between those goals, because so much world opinion now, even some criticism from the U.S. from President Trump is being turned against Netanyahu, and even elements within Israel more to seeing this mass starvation are coming to terms with it are maybe likely to be less supportive of Netanyahu and his sort of ultra and the far right coalition there. I mean, do you think there is? Do you think this actually might be working against him and maybe be giving him a reason to say, well, okay, slightly less starvation in Gaza?
Yeah, I mean, I've tried to be careful in my earlier comments and point out that strain of kind of extremely expansionist Zionism, which maybe some people in Europe refer to as settler colonialism, I think that's always been a minority strain of Israeli Zionism and still is. And I think that the majority of Israeli Jews would not share that goal. And in fact, I think that it's getting to the point where one thing that could happen in the next Israeli elections that's never happened before is, so-called Israeli Arabs, which are Palestinians who live inside the 1947 Green Line and who have full citizenship rights in Israel. These are not people who live in the occupied territories. They make up 20% of the population of Israel. They have voting rights. They have elected members in the Knesset. They have their own party. And, so far, none of the Jewish parties, either of the left or of the right, have ever wanted to include the Palestinian Party in a coalition government. But I actually think it's getting to the point where that could happen, where the Labor Party and the other left and center left parties could make a coalition with the Palestinian Party. And then that would completely, that would completely destroy any possibility of Netanyahu maintaining any kind of control. Whatever wiggle there is about how the next election is going to go, it's an absolute certainty that if the left and center left parties decided that they would make a coalition with the Palestinian Party, then Netanyahu is through. And I think we could see that happening because I do think that politics in Israel, in the left and center left are shifting, that they're more appalled by Netanyahu than by the idea of making a coalition with the Palestinians.
And there's certainly a lot of time for that to develop. I believe the next Israeli elections are in October of 2026. And so still a ways to go, and a lot can change on the ground between then and now for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Any other thoughts on Gaza, starvation, Israel before we move on?
Well, I do wonder, if other countries are going to get a little bit more involved when it becomes clear that the U.S. is not really doing anything, and that I did see yesterday the Arab League, which represents 22 Arab governments, did issue a call for Hamas to disarm and for a Palestinian state to be recognized. And the call actually went beyond disarmament, because it said Hamas must end its rule in Gaza. So that was an explicit declaration endorsed unanimously by the 22 members of the Arab League. And I think that could possibly signal that the next thing the Arab League is going to do is offer to get involved in giving famine relief. And that could actually upend that dynamic that we were just talking about, where the only available mechanisms for famine relief run through one or the other of the combatants. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I guess in thinking about all this, I still come back to, I don't exactly know what destroy Hamas means. I mean, it sounds good as an objective, but does that mean like literally just killing everyone who is affiliated with Hamas in some way, shape? I mean, I'm just trying to, one of the things that you learn early on, at least if you're interested in military strategy and all that, is you don't go into a fight without a clear objective and a plan to meet that objective. And it just seems like this is just such a. I understand Israel had to retaliate in a big way for the horrific actions of Hamas on October 7th, but again, it just seems like there's no real plan there. And that just makes me wonder how long this can go on with no plan and so many people suffering. We hope you enjoyed this preview of our supporters exclusive midweek show. If you'd like to hear the rest of the episode, we hope you'll consider becoming a supporter. Supporters get ad-free access to all of our shows, membership in our Politics Guys Discord group where you can join in on the conversation, and other benefits at different levels of support. To become a supporter, go to patreon.com/politicsguys. You can also support us through Venmo or @politicsguys, or through PayPal. You'll find all of our support links in the show notes, as well as at politicsguys.com/support. And if you'd like to get the midweek show, but you're not in a position to become a financial supporter, that's not a problem. Just send me an email at mike@politicsguys.com, and I'll be happy to get that set up for you.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,